This is the story of December 9th, 1967, Oakland, California. A night that changed everything and nothing. A night that has haunted every person who witnessed it. A night that Bruce Lee himself never spoke about publicly. Not once. Not ever. This is the story they told me I should never tell. December 1967. Bruce Lee is 27 years old. To the world, he barely exists. No films, no television shows, no magazine covers. He runs a small martial arts school in Oakland's Chinatown, teaching a handful of students a fighting system most Americans have never heard of, Wing Chun filtered through his own revolutionary modifications. His name means nothing to 99% of the population. But in certain rooms, in certain circles, in the underground networks of fighters who test themselves against each other far from any official ring or regulated competition, Bruce Lee's name is spoken with a strange mixture of reverence and disbelief. They say he moves like water. They say his strikes are faster than the eye can process. They say he has developed something beyond traditional martial arts, something he calls Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, a philosophy as much as a fighting method. No classical forms, no rigid patterns, only what works. Only what is real. But these are just stories, demonstrations at local tournaments, exhibitions for small crowds, whispers pass between fighters in gyms and dojos. No one has seen Bruce Lee in a real fight. Not the kind of fight where reputation means nothing and only survival matters. Not the kind of fight where there are no rules, no referees, no safety. Not the kind of fight where you either walk out or get carried out. Until December 9th, 1967. I first heard about this fight in 1996. I was interviewing Dan Inosanto, one of Bruce Lee's closest students and friends, for a book I was writing. We had been talking for 3 hours. The formal interview was over. The recorder was off. We were just two people drinking coffee talking about a man we both admired. That's when Dan said something that made my blood freeze. "There was a fight," he said quietly, staring into his cup. "A real one. The only real one I ever saw Bruce in. It wasn't supposed to happen. It should never have happened." He stopped. His hand was shaking slightly. "How many people saw it?" I asked. Dan looked at me. His eyes were different, haunted. "7, he said. "Only 7. And Bruce made us all swear we would never talk about it." "Why, Dan?" Inosanto, a man I'd known for years, a man who had shared countless stories about Bruce Lee, who had laughed and demonstrated techniques and showed me photographs and letters, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. "Fear, because," he said, "of what it revealed about him, about what he was capable of, about how far he would go. He didn't tell me the full story that day. He wouldn't, but he gave me a name, one of the other witnesses. And he said, if you're going to chase this, understand something. This isn't a triumphant story. This isn't Bruce defeating some villain. This is darker than that, much darker. It took me 6 years to find all 7 witnesses. 2 had died. 1 refused to speak to me at all, even after I flew to Hong Kong to meet him. He opened his door, saw my face, saw the research materials in my hands, and said one sentence, 'I have nothing to say about that night.' Then he closed the door. But 4 of them talked, slowly, carefully, with long pauses and obvious pain. And when I pieced together their testimonies, checking every detail against the others, I realized Dan Inosanto had been right. This was not a triumphant story. This was the story of what happens when a man who has spent his entire life mastering violence finally uses everything he knows. Not for sport, not for demonstration, not for teaching. For real. The man who challenged Bruce Lee was not a fool. Let me be clear about that from the beginning. This was not some amateur with delusions of grandeur. This was not a drunk picking a fight in a bar. This was not a student trying to prove himself. This was a professional, a fighter who had spent 15 years in environments where losing meant more than embarrassment. It meant broken bones, shattered careers, sometimes worse. I cannot tell you his real name, so I will call him what the witnesses called him, the Russian. Not because of his nationality, though that was part of it, but because of his style, a brutal, efficient fighting method developed in Soviet military programs. Sistema combined with Sambo, mixed with street fighting, refined through actual use. The Russian was 34 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, 220 pounds of muscle built through years of training that would hospitalize most people. He had fought in underground competitions across 3 continents. His record, according to one witness who had connections in that world, was 47 wins, 2 losses. Both losses were early in his career. He had never lost in the last 8 years. He had come to California for reasons that remain unclear to me. Some witnesses said he was training fighters. Others said he was running from something in his past. What is clear is that by December 1967, he had established himself in certain circles in the Bay Area. Not mainstream, not legal. The kinds of places where money changed hands and fights happened in warehouses and basements. The Russian had heard about Bruce Lee. He had heard the stories, the impossible speed, the 1-inch punch that could knock a man backward 6 feet, the demonstrations that left experienced martial artists shaking their heads in disbelief. And the Russian did not believe any of it. To him, Bruce Lee was a performer, a showman, someone who could do impressive things in controlled environments with cooperative partners, but who had never been tested in real combat. The Russian had seen plenty of traditional martial artists. He had fought several of them. They had beautiful techniques that fell apart the moment real violence entered the equation. He wanted to test Bruce Lee. Not hurt him, not humiliate him, just test him, see if the legend matched reality. So he sent word. This is where the story becomes difficult to verify completely, because the exact method of the challenge varies depending on which witness you ask, but the core facts align. In late November 1967, a message reached Bruce Lee through a chain of contacts in the Bay Area martial arts community. The Russian wanted to fight him, not in a tournament, not in a demonstration, a private match. No rules, no referee, no time limit, just two fighters and the truth. Bruce Lee's first response, according to James Jim Lee, one of his senior students who was present when the message arrived, was silence. He read the message, folded it carefully, and placed it in his pocket. "Are you going to respond?" James asked. Bruce looked at him. "I already have. What do you mean?" By not responding immediately, I've told him everything he needs to know. Which is, Bruce smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile his students knew. It was something colder, that I'm considering it. For 2 weeks, Bruce Lee did not answer. The Russian sent another message, then another, each one more direct, each one making it clear this was not going away. Finally, on December 4th, Bruce Lee sent his response. He would fight, but on his conditions. The conditions Bruce Lee set were specific, and they tell you everything about how he was thinking. Location, a private space, not a gym, not a dojo. Somewhere neutral where neither fighter had advantage or familiarity. Witnesses, no more than 7 people. 3 chosen by Bruce, 3 chosen by the Russian, 1 neutral party to verify what happened. No weapons, no biting, no eye gouging. Everything else was permitted. The fight would continue until one person could not continue or until one person verbally submitted. No photographs, no recording, no publicity afterward, regardless of outcome. And one more condition, the one that several witnesses remembered most clearly. If either fighter was seriously injured or killed, everyone present would claim it was a training accident. No police, no investigation, no consequences beyond what happened in that room. The Russian agreed to everything. The neutral witness was a man named Robert, a former military combat instructor who had trained fighters for years and had no loyalty to either man. I interviewed Robert in 2004 in a small apartment in San Diego. He was 71 years old. His memory was sharp. "I've seen a lot of fights," he told me. "Military combat trials, bare-knuckle matches before it had that name, street fights that started over nothing and ended with ambulances. I thought I had seen everything." He paused, looking out his window at the ocean. "I had not seen anything like what happened that night. The location was chosen 3 days before the fight. An industrial building in West Oakland, abandoned, scheduled for demolition in early 1968. Concrete floors, high ceilings, one large open room approximately 40 feet by 40 feet, a single skylight letting in cold December moonlight, perfect acoustics for every sound, every breath, every impact." The 7 witnesses arrived separately. Bruce Lee came with James Jim Lee and Dan Inosanto. The Russian brought 2 men whose names I never learned. Robert arrived alone. They gathered at 11 p.m., late enough that the streets were empty, late enough that no one would notice cars parked near an abandoned building. Dan Inosanto described the atmosphere to me. "It felt like we were doing something illegal, which technically we were, but it felt like more than that. It felt like we were crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed." Bruce Lee arrived wearing simple black pants and a black t-shirt. No shoes, no jewelry, nothing that could be grabbed or used against him. The Russian wore similar clothing, gray pants, gray shirt, also barefoot. They did not shake hands. They did not bow. They stood on opposite sides of the room and looked at each other with the cold assessment of men who understood exactly what was about to happen. Robert stepped into the center of the space. "You both understand the conditions?" Both men nodded. "You both agree to those conditions?" "Yes," said the Russian. His accent was thick, but his English was clear. "Yes," said Bruce Lee. His voice was quiet, calm. Robert looked at both of them one more time. Then he stepped back to the wall. "Begin when ready." Neither man moved. This is the part that every witness remembered with absolute clarity, the stillness before it started. Bruce Lee and the Russian, 40 feet apart, absolutely motionless, studying each other. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. "I've never seen Bruce so still," Dan Inosanto told me. Usually before a demonstration or sparring session, there was movement, loosening up, shifting weight. But that night, he was like a statue, just watching, breathing. The Russian moved first. The Russian's approach was methodical, professional. He didn't rush, didn't charge like an angry amateur trying to prove something. He walked forward with the careful, measured steps of a man who had done this 47 times before and survived every single one. His hands were up but loose, not the tight fists of a boxer. Open hands, ready to grab or strike. His weight distributed evenly. Every step testing the concrete floor, feeling for irregularities, understanding the terrain. Bruce Lee didn't move. He stood exactly where Robert had left him, watching the Russian close the distance. 40 feet became 30. 30 became 20. I wanted to shout at him, James told me, his voice still carrying the tension of that night decades later. I wanted to tell him to move, to circle, to do something. But Bruce had told us before we arrived, no matter what you see, stay silent. Do not interfere, do not speak. So we stayed silent, but inside I was screaming. At 15 feet, the Russian changed his rhythm. It was subtle, a slight acceleration in his steps, a minor adjustment in his hand position, preparation for an attack that would come in the next 2 or 3 seconds, and that's when Bruce Lee moved. Not backward, not to the side, forward. 3 steps, impossibly fast, closing the distance the Russian had spent 20 seconds creating. And before the Russian could process what was happening, Bruce Lee's lead hand was at his face. Not a punch, a touch. fingertips against the Russian's forehead, light as a feather. Then Bruce Lee was gone back to his original position, 15 feet away again. The room was absolutely silent. I didn't understand what I'd just seen, Robert told me. My brain couldn't process the speed. One moment Bruce was standing still. The next moment he was touching the Russian's face. The next moment he was 15 feet away again. There was no transition, no visible movement between positions. It was like watching a film with frames cut out. The Russian stood frozen. His hand came up slowly to his forehead, touching the spot where Bruce's fingers had been. He understood the message. I can touch you whenever I want, which means I can hit you whenever I want, which means you are already defeated. You just don't know it yet. But the Russian had not survived 47 fights by accepting defeat easily. He attacked. A straight punch, fast and heavy, aimed at Bruce's centerline. The kind of punch that had ended fights before. The kind of punch thrown with full commitment, full power, the kind you cannot pull back from. Bruce Lee slipped it by 2 inches. His head moved, just moved, and the fist passed through empty air where his face had been a fraction of a second before. The Russian's second punch came immediately, a hook to the body following the miss straight. Good combination. Professional technique. Bruce Lee wasn't there. He had shifted, weight transferred, body angled, and the hook hit nothing. Third punch, fourth punch, fifth punch. The Russian was fast, genuinely fast, trained, refined, dangerous. But every punch hit air. It was like watching someone try to hit water, Dan Inosanto said. Bruce wasn't blocking, wasn't deflecting, he was just not there. Every time a punch arrived at the space his body should occupy, his body was somewhere else. Minimal movement, perfect timing, and the Russian was getting frustrated. You could see it in his rhythm, the punches getting slightly wilder, the technique starting to crack under the psychological pressure of hitting nothing. And then Bruce Lee countered. A kick low, fast, to the Russian's lead leg just above the knee. The sound echoed through the empty building, a sharp crack of shin against muscle. The Russian's leg buckled. Not completely, he didn't fall, but he stumbled. Balance disrupted, and in that half second of vulnerability, Bruce Lee was inside his guard. 3 strikes faster than you could count them. 1 to the solar plexus, 1 to the ribs, 1 to the jaw. Then Bruce was out again, 5 feet away, hands down, breathing normally. The Russian staggered backward, hand on his ribs, trying to process what had just happened. That's when I saw it in the Russian's eyes, Robert said. The realization. He had been in 47 fights, he had won 47 fights, but he had never fought anyone like this, never fought anyone who moved like this, never fought anyone who could hit him 3 times before he could react once. The Russian spit blood onto the concrete floor, straightened up, set his feet again. He was hurt, but he was not finished. What happened next is difficult to describe because it happened so fast that even the witnesses disagree on the exact sequence. The Russian changed strategies, stopped trying to strike, started trying to grab. This made sense. If he couldn't hit what he couldn't catch, then catching became the priority, and the Russian had training in Sambo Soviet grappling techniques designed to take a man to the ground and break his joints. He lunged forward, hands reaching for Bruce Lee's arms, shoulders, anything he could control. Bruce Lee evaded, but barely. The Russian was adapting, learning Bruce's rhythm, predicting the evasions. One hand caught Bruce's wrist for a quarter of a second. The Russian had him. His grip was iron, trained through years of grappling. He started to pull, to close the distance, to bring Bruce into the clinch where size and weight would matter more than speed. Bruce Lee did something none of the witnesses had seen before. He moved into the grab, not away from it, into it. His free hand struck the Russian's elbow precise, targeted, the joint hyperextended with an audible pop. The Russian's grip released instantly. His arm dropped, damaged but not broken. He backed away, cradling the elbow. And for the first time, real pain showed on his face. I thought it was over, James Lee said. I thought the Russian would submit. His arm was hurt. Bruce had proven his point. But the Russian looked at his damaged arm, looked at Bruce, and I saw something in his expression that terrified me. He wasn't going to stop. He was going to keep fighting until he couldn't fight anymore. The Russian switched to his other arm, attacked again. Kicks now mixed with punches. Desperate, aggressive, the technique deteriorating into pure violence. Bruce Lee blocked a kick, trapped the leg, swept the supporting leg. The Russian went down hard, back hitting concrete. The sound reverberated through the building, but he rolled immediately. Fighter's instinct, never stay down, never give your opponent the opportunity to follow up. He came up in a crouch, breathing hard, blood from his mouth dripping onto the floor. Bruce Lee stood 5 feet away, still calm, still controlled. Stop, Bruce said, the first word either fighter had spoken since the fight began. The Russian shook his head, stood up fully. I know you're hurt, Bruce continued. His voice was soft, but it carried through the space. I know your arm is damaged, your ribs are cracked, you're bleeding internally. I can see it. This is finished. The Russian wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. Not finished, he said. His English was breaking down, the accent thickening with pain and exhaustion. Not finished until I cannot stand. Bruce Lee's expression changed. The witnesses described it differently. Dan Inosanto said it looked like sadness. Robert said it looked like resignation. Jim Lee said it looked like something darker, like Bruce was making a decision he didn't want to make. Then we continue, Bruce said quietly. What happened in the next 90 seconds has been debated among the witnesses for decades. Not because they disagree on what happened, they all saw the same thing. They debate it because they're still trying to understand how it was possible. The Russian attacked one more time, a final, desperate assault, everything he had left. Bruce Lee didn't evade, he intercepted. Every strike the Russian threw, Bruce intercepted, not blocked, intercepted. His hands met the Russian's fists and feet before they could fully extend, absorbing the power, redirecting the energy, turning the Russian's own force against him. Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. Not a theory, not a philosophy, reality. And then Bruce Lee stopped defending and started finishing it. A strike to the Russian's damaged ribs. The Russian gasped, doubled over. A palm strike to the jaw. The Russian's head snapped back. A sweep the Russian's legs taken out from under him. He hit the concrete again, tried to roll, couldn't. His body wasn't responding anymore. Bruce Lee stood over him. "Stay down," Bruce said. The Russian tried to get up. Made it to his hands and knees. Collapsed. Tried again. Got 1 foot under him. Collapsed again. "Stay down," Bruce repeated. The Russian looked up at him, blood on his face, breathing ragged, and he nodded. A tiny movement. Submission. It was over. Robert stepped forward. Fight concluded. Winner, Lee. The silence that followed was absolute. Bruce Lee stepped back from the Russian and turned away. His hands were shaking. Not from exertion, not from adrenaline. The witnesses were very clear about this. Bruce Lee was shaking from something else entirely. Dan Inosanto moved to help the Russian. Jim Lee approached Bruce. "Bruce," James said softly, "it's over. You won." Bruce didn't respond. He walked to the far corner of the room, put his hands against the concrete wall, and stood there. His shoulders were rising and falling with deep breaths. "I'd never seen him like that," James told me. Bruce was always in control, always composed, but in that moment he looked broken, not physically, emotionally, like something inside him had cracked. The Russian was helped to his feet by Dan and one of his own people. His ribs were definitely cracked, his elbow was swelling rapidly, his face was already bruising. He would need medical attention, though not the kind that required explaining what happened to authorities. Robert approached the Russian. "You need a hospital." The Russian shook his head. "I know someone. Private doctor, no questions." "Can you walk?" "Yes." The Russian took 3 steps and stopped. He looked across the room to where Bruce Lee was still standing against the wall. "Lee," he called out. Bruce didn't turn around. "Lee," the Russian repeated. "Look at me." Bruce turned slowly. The Russian, blood on his face, arm cradled against his ribs, looked at Bruce Lee with an expression that none of the witnesses expected. Respect. "You could have broken my arm," the Russian said. "When you hyperextended my elbow, you could have broken it completely. Easy." Bruce didn't respond. "You could have broken my ribs. Not cracked, broken, punctured lung, internal bleeding. That kills me in 1 hour." Still no response from Bruce. "You could have broken my jaw, crushed my throat, ended this in 10 seconds instead of 6 minutes. The Russian took a painful breath, but you did not. Every strike was controlled, measured. You hurt me enough to stop me, not enough to destroy me. Why?" Bruce Lee was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I didn't want to find out what I'm capable of." The Russian nodded slowly, as if this answer made perfect sense to him. "You are better than anyone I have fought," the Russian said. "Not because you were faster, not because you were stronger, because you have more control over your body, over your opponent, over yourself." He paused. "This is mastery, real mastery." Then the Russian did something that shocked everyone in the room. He bowed, a deep, respectful bow to Bruce Lee. When he straightened up, there were tears mixing with the blood on his face. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching me, for showing me there are levels beyond where I am." Then he turned to his people. "We leave now." The Russian and his 2 companions walked out of the building. They never saw Bruce Lee again. According to one witness who maintained contact with people in that world, the Russian left California within a week, returned to Europe, never fought professionally again. I tried to find him for this research. Spent 2 years following leads across 3 countries. The trail went cold in Berlin in 2003. I don't know if he's alive or dead. I don't know if he ever told anyone about that night. But I know this, Bruce Lee changed him, fundamentally, permanently. After the Russian left, the 4 remaining witnesses stood in silence. Bruce Lee was still against the wall, motionless. Dan Inosanto approached him carefully. "Bruce?" "I never want to do that again," Bruce said, his voice hollow. "Never." "You won't have to," Dan replied. Bruce turned to face them. His eyes were red. "You don't understand. I felt it during the fight. A part of me that wanted to keep going, to not stop at controlling him, to destroy him completely." He paused. "That part of me enjoyed it. This is what Dan Inosanto meant when he told me this wasn't a triumphant story." Bruce Lee had proven he could fight, truly fight, against a dangerous, trained opponent in a real situation with real consequences. He had won decisively, skillfully, with the control and precision that would later define his legend. The victory had shown him something about himself he wished he'd never seen. A capacity for violence that went beyond self-defense or sport. A darkness that lived inside him, waiting. Before they left the building, Bruce made all 4 witnesses swear an oath. They would never speak of this fight publicly, never write about it, never confirm it happened. If anyone asked, they knew nothing. "This fight proves nothing," Bruce told them. "It doesn't make me a better teacher. It doesn't advance martial arts. It only proves that I can hurt people. The world doesn't need to know that." They kept that promise for decades. Only after Bruce's death in 1973 did the witnesses begin, very quietly, very carefully, to acknowledge that something had happened, but never the full story, never the details, until now. I have told you this story because I believe Bruce Lee was wrong about one thing. This fight does prove something, not about his ability to hurt people, but about his ability to control himself, to fight at the absolute edge of his capability while maintaining enough humanity to show mercy. That is not darkness. That is enlightenment. The building where this fight occurred was demolished in January 1968. Nothing marks the location now, just an empty lot in West Oakland. But on December 9th, 1967, in that space, 7 people witnessed something extraordinary. Not a movie, not a demonstration, not a legend. The truth. Bruce Lee, 27 years old, facing real violence with real consequences and choosing control over destruction. Choosing to be more than just a fighter. Choosing to be human. This is the story they told me to bury. But some truths deserve to be remembered, not to glorify violence, but to understand the man who spent his life trying to transcend it. Only 7 people witnessed Bruce Lee's most dangerous fight. Now you have 2. There is a photograph of Bruce Lee that was taken sometime in early 1968, a few weeks, maybe a month after the fight. You can find it if you look closely. It's not famous, it's not in any book. It was taken by a student at the Oakland school during a regular training session. In the photo, Bruce is standing near the window. He's not posing, not demonstrating. He's looking at something outside the frame, something the camera cannot capture. His hands are at his sides, his body is relaxed, but his eyes are different. I've studied this photo for years. I've shown it to people who knew Bruce before December 9th and people who knew him afterward. They all say the same thing. Something changed. Something behind his eyes changed that night and never returned. It is the look of a man who has seen the deepest point of his being, who has descended into the darkest corner of his own nature, touched what lives there, and withdrawn his hand before it was too late. Most people never experience this moment. Most people live their entire lives without ever reaching the limits of what they are truly capable of. They discuss violence in abstract terms. They debate strength and weakness from a comfortable distance. They never have to choose between destruction and mercy in real time with real consequences. Bruce Lee made that decision on a cold concrete floor in West Oakland, and the weight of that decision never left him. In the 5 years between that night and his death on July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee became the most famous martial artist in human history. He made films that changed cinema, wrote philosophies that changed people's understanding of combat and the relationship between body and mind. He moved through the world like a comet, burning bright, burning fast, with an intensity that seemed to come from depths deeper than ambition or talent. I believe that intensity came from December 9th, not from victory, from fear. Fear of what he had felt inside himself when the Russian refused to stay down, and Bruce Lee realized he had to make a decision, hold back and risk losing, or let go and risk becoming something he could never undo. He held back. He chose control. He chose mercy, but he never forgot how close he came to choosing otherwise. In Japanese martial arts, there's a concept called Satsujin Ken and Katsujin Ken, the sword that takes life and the sword that gives life. The idea that the highest mastery lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to choose not to destroy when you have every opportunity and every right to do so. Bruce Lee never formally studied Japanese philosophy, but that night, barefoot on cold concrete, breathing heavily, standing over a man who had pushed him further than anyone before, he embodied it perfectly. The sword that gives life. Sometimes I think about the Russian, wherever he may be, whether he is alive or dead, whether he ever told anyone what happened. I think about how he bowed to Bruce Lee with blood and tears on his face, and I wonder if he understood even then what he had seen. Not a fight, not a victory, but a man refusing to become a monster. I spent 11 years researching this story. I traveled to 4 countries. I interviewed dozens of people. I read thousands of documents. And I keep coming back to the same moment. Not the spectacular evasive maneuvers, not the impossible speed, not the technical brilliance that left witnesses speechless. I keep coming back to Bruce Lee standing against that concrete wall with trembling hands, red eyes, and words that still haunt me. I never want to do that again. Never. That is the measure of a man. Not what he can do, what he chooses not to do, not the power he possesses, the power he holds back. Bruce Lee died at the age of 32. Young. Far too young. The world mourned a film star, a martial artist, a cultural icon. But 7 people mourned something else, something the world never knew about. They mourned a man who had been tested in the most fundamental way a human being can be tested, and who had passed that test, not by winning, by refusing to win completely. December 9th, 1967. 7 witnesses, 1 fight, 1 truth. The strongest person in the room is not the one who can destroy everything. The strongest person in the room is the one who could destroy everything and chooses not to. Remember that. Remember him.